It began on a night I still wish I had walked home instead of calling for a ride. The rain had been relentless that evening, soaking every street in the city, turning reflections of traffic lights into trembling streaks of red and gold on the pavement. I had stayed late at work longer than usual, and by the time I stepped out the office, the streets were almost empty. I hailed a taxi at the corner, the kind of older model with fading paint, and an inside that smelled faintly of damp fabric and cigarettes. The driver looked ordinary, middle-aged, with sunken eyes and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. He didn't speak much, and I didn't either. I told him my address, and he nodded without turning his head. The city outside was smeared by rain on the windows, and the hum of the engine was low and constant. It was one of those moments when everything feels too still, too quiet, and your mind begins to notice every small sound, like the squeak of the wipers and the subtle shifting of the tires. Over the wet road halfway through the ride, I realized something strange. The driver had glanced into the rearview mirror several times, but not at me, not exactly. It was as if he was looking past me, his eyes flicked up toward the reflection. Then, back to the road again, I felt the uneasy pull of curiosity and looked over my shoulder. The back seat behind me was empty, or at least I thought it was. There was no light in the back, only the faint red wash of the brake lights through the rear window. But I could feel it, that subtle pressure in the air, that sensation of not being alone, even though there was no one else visible. I told myself it was my imagination, the rain, the dark, the late hour. It could make anyone uneasy. I turned back to the front, trying to ignore the growing tightness in my chest. When we reached a red light, the driver spoke softly, almost as if to himself. "Do you see it too?" He said. I froze. I asked him what he meant, and he didn't answer. He just stared into the mirror, his face tightening slightly. Then, without another word, he pressed down on the accelerator. Even before the light had turned green, the first sat completely still, afraid to look behind me again. The air had changed. It felt colder, like someone had opened a door somewhere. And in a draft, I wanted to get out of the car, but we were already speeding down the next street. The driver kept his eyes forward, both hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. When we finally pulled up in front of my building, I reached for my wallet, but he stopped me, his voice trembling. "Just go," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything." I stared at him, confused and slightly frightened. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, as though he couldn't look away. I got out slowly. The rain was still falling, cold and heavy. When I closed the door behind me, I glanced once more through the window, and that's when I saw it, a shape darker than the shadows, sitting exactly where I had been seconds before. Its outline faintly human, but twisted, its head turned toward the driver, as if leaning close to whisper something. The taxi pulled away quickly, its headlights disappearing into the storm. I stood on the sidewalk, drenched, staring into the distance for a long time, trying to convince myself that the rain or the light had played a trick on me. But later that night, when I walked past my apartment window, I saw headlights pause on the street below for just a moment, and a familiar silhouette in the back seat turning its head upward, as if looking for me. That was the first night I realized something had followed me home from that ride, something that wasn't supposed to leave the car for the next few days. I try to forget about that night. Every logical part of me told myself I had imagined it, that the combination of rain and exhaustion had made me see what I wanted to see, but logic doesn't explain why I kept hearing the faint hum of an idling engine outside my apartment window at night, or why my bathroom mirror fogged slightly, even when there was no steam, no shower, just a faint scent of gasoline lingering in the air. I didn't sleep much. The feeling of being watched grew thicker, like a fog, in every corner of the room. At first it was subtle, the kind of unease that makes you check your locks twice, but soon I began to wake in the middle of the night, convinced someone was standing by my bed. There was never anyone there, of course, but the air always felt disturbed, slightly colder near the floor, as if something unseen had recently moved past. One morning, as I left for work, I noticed something on the pavement outside my building, a faint wet footprint, not from a shoe, but bare, as though someone had walked through the rain barefoot. It was facing my door, and the shape was strange, wider than normal, and uneven, as though whoever it belonged to had dragged part of their foot. With every step, I looked down the street, but there was no one. The air smelled faintly of exhaust. That same evening, I took a walk to clear my mind. The rain had started again, light but steady. The streets were almost empty, and the sound of tires over wet asphalt echoed far off. I turned onto a smaller road where old streetlights flickered, and that's when I saw a taxi parked by the curb, the same color, the same shape as the one I had taken home that night. The windows were fogged, the license plate smeared by dirt. The engine wasn't running, but there was condensation forming inside. Like breath against the glass, I stood there unable to move for a moment. Then slowly the condensation cleared just enough for me to see the back seat, and my heart froze. There was a shadow sitting there upright, perfectly still, facing the front. Its head was slightly tilted toward me, as though aware of my presence. I stepped back, one careful motion at a time, and that's when the car's headlights flicked on bright and blinding. I ran without looking back. When I finally reached my apartment building, I turned to see if it had followed me, but the street behind was empty. No car, no lights, only the echo of my footsteps in the rain. That night, I left the light on in my living room. I told myself I would stay awake until morning, but I must have drifted off because I woke to a sound that nearly stopped my heart. It was the low rumble of an engine coming from somewhere below me. My building didn't have a parking garage, yet it sounded close, right beneath the floor. I moved to the window and looked down, but the street was dark. Then the sound stopped, leaving behind an unbearable silence. That's when my phone lit up on the table. A text from an unknown number with no name attached. It said, "Simply, you left something in the car." I stared at it until my vision blurred. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it. I only turned off the phone and sat there in the dim light until dawn, too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe too loudly. But as the sun began to rise, I heard it faintly again, a sound from outside my window, the soft click of a car door opening and closing, followed by the low, rhythmic hum of an engine idling, waiting, patient and unending. For days after that text message, I lived in a quiet state of dread. Every time I went outside, I half expected to see that same taxi parked somewhere nearby. Sometimes I did, sometimes it was gone before I could blink. I stopped using taxis altogether, choosing instead to walk or take the bus, but it didn't help. The feeling of being followed lingered behind me like a shadow that refused to stay attached. One night, I caught my reflection in a shop window, and for a split second, it wasn't me. The face staring back had the same eyes, but darker, deeper set, like someone who had been awake for too many nights and seen something they were never supposed to see. I told myself it was just exhaustion, but my reflection seemed slower to move than I was, as if it was delayed by something unseen holding it in place. The next evening, it rained again. Hard and relentless, the kind of rain that drowns out sound, makes the world feel hollow and distant. The city lights blurred into streaks on the pavement, and when I passed an alley, I saw it there, the taxi parked again, headlights off, engine silent. Yet I could feel the faint vibration of it in the ground, like a living thing breathing low and steady. I should have kept walking, but I didn't. I stepped closer, my heart thudding in time with the rain. My reflection appeared in the wet window of the driver's side door, and for a moment I saw not one, but two shapes inside. The faint outline of the driver slumped forward, and behind him, the back seat, a dark form leaning to one side, head bent unnaturally low, its face obscured by the angle of the Right then, something happened that I still can't explain. The rearview mirror inside the car shifted slightly. I heard the faint scrape of glass and saw my own reflection staring at me from inside the mirror. Even though I was outside, my reflection blinked once, but I didn't. It smiled, a slow, impossible curve that my mouth didn't follow. I stumbled back. The taxi's windshield fogged up rapidly from the inside, like someone had exhaled against it from both seats. Then two distinct handprints pressed against the glass from within and slowly dragged downward, leaving long streaks through the mist. That night, when I returned home, I locked every door and window, but I could still feel that smile behind my eyes. I checked my phone, even though I didn't want to. There was another message waiting from the same number. You saw me this time. I didn't sleep at all. The rain didn't stop. The world outside my window seemed to fade into one long shadow, and the air inside my apartment felt too heavy, like someone else was breathing it too. I tried to convince myself I was losing my mind until I noticed something that broke me completely. The small rectangular mirror I kept by the door, the one I used to check my hair before leaving, was fogged as if someone had breathed on it from the other side. When I wiped it clean, a single word was traced faintly in the moisture ride. I threw the mirror out that night. But when I woke the next morning, it was back, leaning against the wall by the door, exactly where it had always been, and this time the faint outline of a figure sat reflected in it behind me. Even though I was completely alone after the mirror returned, I stopped sleeping entirely. The faint reflection of that figure never left its glass. Even in daylight, it sat behind me, motionless, its face always obscured by a blur like condensation on a window. I stopped trying to cover the mirror or move it, because no matter where I placed it the next morning, it would always return to the wall by the door, angled. So it caught my back perfectly when I passed. My phone kept vibrating with messages from the unknown number, but I refused to open them. At first, it was easy to ignore, but the notifications began arriving at the exact same times. Each night, always at the hour when the city grew silent enough to hear your own pulse echo inside your skull. One night, the phone lit up again, and despite my resolve, I looked. It wasn't a message this time. It was a live image stream showing the interior of a taxi, the back seat empty, but wet with rainwater that trickled down the leather. The driver's seat was out of view, but I could hear shallow, uneven breathing through the faint hiss of static. I froze, watching the camera pan slowly to the rearview mirror, and I saw something impossible. It wasn't a reflection of the cab interior, but of my apartment, my door, my mirror, and in the glass behind me, the figure moved for the first time. Its head tilted slightly, as though curious about me. I dropped the phone, but the feed didn't stop. The sound continued, low and steady, like someone whispering without words. I unplugged the phone, took out the battery, and shoved it in a drawer. But even in the faint, wet rhythm of breathing filled the air from somewhere near the door. That was the night. The knocking began not at the front door, but inside the walls, a slow dragging tap that followed me from room to room. The pattern was deliberate, always 3 slow knocks, then silence. I pressed my ear against the wall once and heard it shift from the other side, as if someone leaned closer too. When I finally built up the courage to check the hallway, the light outside my door flickered, and the air smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. I knew before I saw it that the taxi was waiting. The faint glow of its headlights pulsed against the rain, its engine quiet, but humming like a heartbeat. I could almost feel it in my chest. I went outside anyway, because fear had started to feel like gravity, something that pulled me closer. No matter how hard I fought, the driver's door was slightly open, just enough to see the empty seat inside. The interior lights were dim, but the back seat was not empty. A shape was sitting there, knees bent, head turned toward me, completely Still, the rain intensified as I stepped closer. I could see the drops running down its motionless face and realized it wasn't rain at all, but condensation forming and vanishing like breath. Its chest moved slightly up and down, as if inhaling slowly. And in that quiet moment, I could hear two distinct sounds, a steady rhythm of rain and the faint hitching breath that matched my own. I turned and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it until the mirror by the door began to fog over again. This time, instead of a word, there was a smudge shaped like a hand pressed from the inside. I moved out the next morning, but as I drove away from the apartment, I saw something through the rearview mirror. A taxi following several cars behind its headlights dimmed the rain, beginning again, as though the world itself had decided not to let me go. I don't remember falling asleep that last night, only the feeling of drifting in and out of dreams that weren't mine. Every time I opened my eyes, I thought I was still in the apartment, but something felt slightly off. The walls were too close to the air, too thick. My body ached like I'd been sitting still for hours. My hands rested on something cold, smooth leather, and then I realized where I was. I was in the back seat of a taxi. The city outside looked blurred through rain streaks that crawled down the window. The driver's silhouette was motionless in front of me, shoulders, hunched head, slightly tilted, as if listening. The meter glowed faint red, but the numbers didn't change, just a frozen zero. 00, the radio hissed softly in static, the same faint rhythm I had heard for weeks. A breath between two worlds. I tried the handle, but it didn't move. I reached forward and knocked on the glass divider. No answer. The driver didn't shift, didn't blink. His head remained bowed forward in that unnatural stillness. And as I stared, I realized his hands were gripping the wheel too tightly. The skin looked swollen, darkened, like soaked. What I whispered for him to stop, but no sound left my throat, only the faint rasp of air that fogged the glass outside the window. The scenery looped endlessly. The same gas station, the same billboard, the same half collapsed overpass, passing again and again, each time the rain heavier than before. I started counting the intervals between the flashes of light, hoping I could find something different, but every turn of the road led back to the same stretch of cracked asphalt. I began to hear something behind me, faint at first, like the gentle shifting of fabric, but it grew louder. With each breath, I took a slow scraping sound from the seat behind me. Even though there was no space behind the backrest, the rearview mirror trembled slightly on its hinge, then angled itself. Without touch, I saw myself in the reflection, eyes wide, mouth open, and behind me the faint outline of another face leaning forward from the shadows, its features washed away by rain streaks. I turned around, but nothing was there, just the smell of damp air and a faint warmth on the seat beside me. I could feel something breathing next to me, steady, measured, as if mimicking my lungs. I pressed myself against the door, trembling, trying not to move, but every time I blinked, I swore the space beside me rippled faintly like heat on metal. The driver finally spoke. His voice was broken, dry, like old leaves scraping across pavement. He said something I couldn't understand, a low series of words that seemed to echo from inside my head, not through my ears. Then he turned his head halfway toward me, not all the way, just enough for me to see his cheek, or what was left of it. The skin was gray and soft like soap paper beneath a layer of condensation. He asked me where I was going. The question wasn't meant for me. It felt like something he repeated every night, waiting for someone who could answer it. I couldn't speak, but the words formed anyway. I said home. The moment I set the car, jerked forward, the headlights flaring white, the road outside began to vanish, swallowed by rain, until all that existed was that faint red glow from the meter and the sound of the engine that wasn't really running something pressed against the window from outside, a handpail, and thin dragging streaks through the condensation. The driver didn't react. He just kept staring straight ahead, his eyes reflected in the mirror, motionless. And dark, the knocking came again. This time, not from the walls, not from my apartment, but from inside the car, the door, the glass, the floor. 100. Tiny knocks like fingertips tapping, impatiently waiting for permission to come in, then silence. The driver turned toward me fully. His eyes were empty sockets, black and glistening, and his mouth moved without sound. But I heard the meaning somehow, as if it bypassed thought completely. He told me I had already arrived. The locks clicked open, and the door on my side swung out to darkness. Not streetlights, not pavement, just endless black that smelled of wet stone and salt water. I stepped out because I couldn't stop myself. The air was thick and cold. My feet sank slightly into something soft, not ground, not sand, but fabric, like the lining of a seat that stretched infinitely outward. The taxi's headlights dimmed behind me until they looked like two distant stars, and then nothing but the faint echo of the engine remained, fading slowly like a heartbeat too far away to belong to me. I woke up in my bed the next morning, my phone beside me, wet as if left in the rain. When I turned it on, the home screen background had changed. It was a photo of the inside of a taxi taken from the back seat, the driver visible in the mirror, and sitting beside him where I should have been was a shape hunched, low head turned toward the camera. The mirror in my hallway is gone, replaced by a faint outline on the wall shaped like a rectangle, but still fogging slightly when I breathe near it every night, since I see headlights flash across my window, even when the sky is clear and dry. And if I stay awake long enough, I can hear it outside, idling, faintly waiting for me to step back in. I think the taxi never stopped driving. It just found new passengers to fill the space left behind.